Hi everyone. Have you always wanted to make an open source contribution, but not sure how to start? Well, this is the talk for you. In this talk, I'm going to explain the steps that you need to take in order to make your first successful open source contribution. My name is Donna, and I'm one of the maintainers of GraphQL Java, and I'm also a software engineer at Atlassian. GraphQL Java is the Java implementation of GraphQL, and it's used by many companies around the world, including Twitter, Netflix, and Atlassian. And I started contributing to GraphQL Java because I wanted to learn more about the library, and I kept going, I made it a habit, and I became a maintainer. And more recently, I wrote a book about GraphQL Java with Andy, who's the person who created the library. So contributing to open source has been an incredibly rewarding decision that I've made, and it's been fantastic to meet engineers who use the library. And it's also been really good fun as well. But it hasn't always been an open source fairy tale. Actually, my first attempt at open source was a failure. And that failure put me off open source for a long time. So in this talk, I want to share with you also what I did differently this time around to succeed. Okay, so when you get started with open source, you might feel intimidated or daunted by the task ahead, and that's totally okay. When I was first browsing the GraphQL Java repo, I was pretty scared because there's some really impressive computer science in that library, and I knew the other two maintainers are Galaxy Brain architects that have a lot of engineering experience. And I was thinking, I really do want to contribute to this library, but I'm not sure if I'm even able to. Well, the trick is you don't have to know every single line of the entire project before you start writing your first pull request. All you have to do is know enough to complete the task that's at hand, and that is absolutely within your grasp. I felt a lot less intimidated when I focused on what I needed to do just to get the next task done, rather than trying to understand everything that was going on in the library. And as I contributed more and more, I eventually learned more about the library. And while there is impressive computer science in the GraphQL Java library, there's also plenty of regular Java code in there too. You don't need 1,000 years of engineering experience before you can contribute. For example, one of the things I did was we had a whole bunch of tests that were using deprecated methods, and so I just went through all the tests and fixed that up. So don't rule yourself out before you even begin. You already have the technical ability to make a meaningful contribution to open source. So you are already good enough. Now, writing open source, it usually happens in your free time. So you're going to need a really strong reason to keep you motivated to finish that first pull request. So my reason for getting started with open source was I wanted to learn more about GraphQL. So I'm a software engineer on the GraphQL Gateway team at Atlassian. And what we do is we help run the public-facing API for the company. And as you can imagine, my job involves GraphQL for everything I do. And the problem was when I joined the team, I had no idea about GraphQL at all. I had never written a query before, and I needed to learn all the things very quickly. And I know my own learning style. I prefer hands-on coding. I find I retain a lot more information compared to reading documentation or tutorials. So I knew that hands-on coding was going to be the best way for me to learn, and that meant that hands-on open source contributions was going to be the best way for me to get up to speed on GraphQL. So I was incredibly motivated to finish those first couple of pull requests. Whatever your reason is for contributing to open source, make sure it's really strong and going to motivate you to finish. So next then is choosing a project to contribute to, and it's very important to choose a project that you're highly, highly interested in. So think back to that reason why you're contributing to open source. Think about your goals. What do you want to achieve with this time? I chose to contribute to GraphQL Java because that's the library I use every day at work, so I wanted to learn the API just so I could do my job better. You could use a project that you use at work as well, or maybe a project that you have a personal interest in. Whatever it is, just make sure it's interesting enough to keep you motivated. And then after you've picked a project, you need to pick a task to do. So to give you some ideas, have a read through the latest issues and discussions on the project's repository. From there, you can get ideas for improvements that you can make, or maybe bugs that have been reported recently that you can go and fix. It's good to subscribe to updates on the repository so that you're up to date with all of the latest changes. And on GitHub, for example, you can do that by clicking Watch Repository. Some repos will also label issues as a good first issue, which is made for first-time contributors, so keep an eye out for those. And if you use the project already, you probably have ideas for improvements, or you've seen bugs and that you can go and fix those. And if you're not sure about what to do, you can always ask the maintainers of the project. I assure you there is always something to work on. It's important to choose a well-defined task so that you know when you're actually done with your contribution. My first attempt at open source failed because I didn't know what I was working on. I didn't define the task at all. It led to a long discussion that didn't go anywhere, and my pull request at the end of the day couldn't get merged because nobody knew whether it was done or not. So don't be like me, pick a well-defined task. And when people talk about open source contributions, the first thing that probably comes to mind is a code change, but that's not the only way that you can contribute to open source. You could be updating documentation, writing a tutorial, you could be answering discussion questions. There's lots of other ways to contribute to open source. These projects are all run by volunteers working in their spare time, so believe me, every kind of contribution is definitely appreciated. Whichever task you choose, make sure you check that task with the maintainers of the project. Ask them, talk about your proposal, and get their sign-off. The reason for this is the maintainers of the project, after your pull request is merged, they become responsible for what you've done, and they're responsible for keeping it up to date well into the future. And so yeah, coming back to my first attempt at open source in this other project, I thought I had the greatest idea ever. I knew my code was perfect. But the problem was, the fatal mistake was I didn't ask the maintainers if they wanted my code at all. And it turns out they didn't. So please make sure you check with the maintainers that they actually want your proposal, they want your change before you spend time working on it. Contributing to open source has been one of the best decisions I've ever made. I learned so much about GraphQL through this experience, and it's been fantastic to meet the engineers that are using the library. Just now in the hallway, somebody told me a bug, which I will review later, so that's really fun, getting to meet and talk with all of you. And GraphQL is powered by open source. The specification, implementations like GraphQL JS and GraphQL Java, and tools that we use like the graphical IDE are all open source, and they're all run by volunteers working in their free time. So all of these projects would absolutely love your help. So if you've been thinking about getting involved in open source, you can do it. All you need to do is to have a strong reason to choose a project and a task that you care about, and most importantly, to remember that you're already good enough. Thank you for listening. We might have maybe time for one question if there is any. Yes? Sorry, could you repeat that? What's the best way to present a proposal, or? Oh, you mean on, okay. So I'm just repeating the question. So what's the best way to present open source contributions to potential employers, perhaps, or on a CV, or? Oh, okay. That is interesting. I haven't thought about that very much. Maybe I'll have more of a think afterwards. But I mean, for me, I'm very fortunate that my job on the GraphQL Gateway is extremely linked to this library. So understanding GraphQL Java inside out means I can do my job a whole lot better. It means I can answer some extremely curly questions about, you know, how engine execution happens or whatever from other teams. And other teams know that they can come and get the definitive answer on the library. So for me, it's, I haven't thought much about my CV because I haven't been applying for jobs. I like where I work at the moment. But for me, I think it just comes through in everything you do, that you have a level of technical depth that other people won't have because you understand things properly. And I think it will shine through an interview that you're somebody who really cares about the community and cares about improving things, even when there isn't a direct financial incentive to do so. And I think especially with more senior engineers, I think they really resonate with people who care. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. If you have any more questions, happy to chat outside. Thanks for listening.